Welcome back to Voidcast. This is the second episode of our new show. I'm your host for today, Lenny, and with me is my co-host and friend, Carlos.
Hello, everyone.
Now, before we get on to the main topic of this episode, just a few things. First of all, the first episode came out last month, and we want to say thanks to everyone who engaged with it and who left a comment or provided some valuable feedback. I would like to say special thanks to Leona, to Christian the vegan, and to the elderberry, and of course to our friend Andrew McIntosh. Anyone you would like to thank, Carlos?
No, I just want to thank you. Thanks to everybody who's listened to the podcast and gave me some personal feedback on it, which I then told Lenny about. But yeah, thanks to everybody who's listened to it.
All right, and just another quick announcement. You are probably listening to us right now on YouTube, which is great. So thank you very much for tuning in again. But you can also check this out on Spotify or Google Podcasts or wherever you want. We were asked to put our podcast on other platforms and make it available there as well. So if you so prefer, you can check us out there too. Now, Carlos put together a link tree on which all these different podcast options and platforms are listed. And we also set up a Twitter account, or whatever it is called now at the time of you listening to the show, at Vegan Voidcast. You can also send us an email simply at veganvoidcast@protonmail.com. These links are also included both in the description and on the link tree. And if you would like to get in touch with us on Discord, we have a small Discord channel on the Vegan Antinatalist Club. Link is in the description and on the link tree. All right, anything else?
No, I think that covers everything. Mostly just go to the link tree, which is at Vegan Voidcast, and all the links will be there. It will make your life easier.
All right. Now, in this episode, we are going to cover the episode Pop Squad of this very popular Netflix animated series, Love, Death, and Robots. Now, just a brief introduction for those of you who are not familiar with this series. This is an animated anthology series, which I think is available on Netflix. And I mean, anthology is just a fancy word that means that the individual episodes of this series are basically just standalone short movies and can be viewed and enjoyed independently of each other. Now, they're directed and produced by different people, but they're always based on short stories of different authors of what's called speculative fiction, which is just an umbrella term for science fiction and fantasy and horror and what have you. So the subject matter and the animation style and the overall tone and quality of the episode differs widely from episode to episode, but usually they portray some sort of dystopian or faraway fantasy setting and explore new technology. This episode, as I said, is called Pop Squad. It was requested by Discord user Dude1, and this is, if I'm not mistaken, the third episode of the second season of Love, Death, and Robots. Now, there are 3 seasons or volumes so far. Number 4 is on the way. And this one is directed by Jennifer Yon Nelson. It's about 15 minutes long, give or take. And it is based on a short story by American author Paolo Bacigalupi, which was first published in 2006 in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction and later reprinted in Paolo Bacigalupi's debut collection, Pump 6 and Other Stories. Now, we have the short story and we have the movie adaptation, and we're going to cover both and highlight the differences if they're worth mentioning. Now, I'm just going to read out the very, very short and brief Netflix synopsis that you can find, just one sentence, and it reads, "A cop charged with fighting the scourge of overpopulation is haunted by the human toll of his work." So, spoilers ahead, we recommend you watch this episode or read it first, but now we're going to walk you through the story and add our commentary. Right, you can also find a link to the Internet Speculative Fiction database in the description if you're interested.
So just to let you know, we as we go kind of scene by scene, since the short story is longer and includes more things than the TV series episode version, we'll tend to go with the longer version. So because that will add more context and meaning to what we're discussing. So we might mention things that exist in the book in the book version, but not in the TV version, by the way.
And vice versa, of course.
Yeah, vice versa. Yes, there's a few differences towards the end, but mostly the book has more things in it than the TV version has. So there's more to comment. If we were just doing the 15-minute episode, maybe our own episode will be shorter too. So similarly to go on.
Before we start with the first scene, this episode, as well as other episodes of Love, Death and Robots, starts with 3 symbols. The first symbol is an eye, the second symbol is a hat, and the third symbol is a dinosaur toy. And these symbols usually provide some sort of foreshadowing, which we're going to refer to later on. Yeah, all right, go ahead.
Yeah, so the first scene, both in the book and in the short story, in the TV episode, they both start with this protagonist, which in the short story doesn't have a name, but he does get a name in the TV show. They call him Briggs. He's about 40 years old, a man, and he's got a squad. He's kind of entering this very shabbily constructed and in very bad state of repair house, where there's a lot going on. There's a woman an older woman being held. And there's another of his colleagues, kind of his detectives, because they all, just to give you some kind of visuals, this all is kind of shot and written as a sort of a noir story. So everybody's got it's always raining. Everybody has a trench coat and a hat, and kind of a rough look to their face, and talks like a tough cop, basically. So the squad is a person called Pentel. That's a male in the story, but then in the episode, the TV episode is actually a female. And there's 2 women there and 3 small children running around. And it looks like the detectives, in this case Briggs and Pentel, are kind of collecting evidence first of what's going on as the women are being taken away. So I guess it would be very reasonable to assume that when this is happening, that it's kind of a child abuse story, perhaps, that these women have been abusing those children, and that's why they're being taken away, or maybe they've committed another crime. And in fact, we learned that the crime they've committed is having children, or in this case, it might be even harboring children, because in this world, it is forbidden to bring children to the world. It's forbidden to reproduce. And the breeders, as they're called in the show and in the story, they're committing a crime. So they are taken away for these work camps which are single sex, which I imagine would be to avoid further children being born, and the children are executed on the spot, which is exactly what happens.
Yeah, so this is a very central scene to the whole story, where the protagonist, or Briggs, executes or murders these kids, and afterwards he's haunted by this memory and by this impression. So I'm going to read out the original from the short story now. The kids race back in, chasing each other, all in a train, laughing and shrieking. They stop and look around, surprised maybe that their moms have disappeared. The littlest one has a stuffed dinosaur by the nose. It's got a long green neck and a fat body. A brontosaurus, I think, with big cartoony eyes and black felt lashes. It's funny about the dinosaur, because they've been gone for so long. But here one is, showing up as a stuffed toy. And then it's funny again, because when you think about it, a dinosaur toy is really extinct twice. Sorry, kids, Mommy's gone. I pull out my Grange. Their heads kick back in successive jerks, bang, 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 down the line, holes appearing on their foreheads like paint, and their brains spattering out the back. Their bodies flip and skid on the black mirror floor. They land in jumbled piles of misaligned limbs. For a second, gunpowder burn makes the stench bearable.
Yeah, so as you can see, the story kind of begins very, very much immediately with the problem that Briggs has to face. And we can assume Briggs has done this before, and quite many times, because he seems to be well regarded by his peers and as a very experienced and steady hand. But in this case, the experience somehow kind of rocks him a little bit. He starts thinking about it, and he will think about this scene for the rest of the episode. Now, there's quite a few things already happening in this scene, which I think are quite interesting, because obviously there's the shock value, right? We have, a character being introduced as a protagonist, and in the short story, this is reinforced by by pretty much him being our point of view character. So we're always with Briggs. We never leave his head, so to speak.
And we also get to see his internal monologue as well, which is kind of missing, of course, in the TV adaptation.
Yeah. So obviously there's kind of that shocking element, which is our hero is in effect a baby killer or a child killer. But there are already several other elements that appear straight away. And one of them is kind of ageism and body disgust, because as we're going to learn later, there's a drug which has been introduced in the world hundreds of years ago, maybe 100 or more years ago, which stops people's aging. So what that means is that people will choose to stop their aging at their prime. So some would say around their early 20s or mid 20s. And to have children,
or rather as soon as they have access to it.
Yes, yeah, of course. In the case of Briggs, he's around in his 40s because he only had access to reju when he was already in middle age. So one of the issues is that this story presents, besides of course the killing of children, which, to be fair, I don't think is a central question of the story. The killing of children is more like all the elements of this society together. So what happens is that there's an element of kind of body disgust and ageism, because the woman who's supposed to be the mother in this case, although she does seem a bit old to be their mother, there's lots of mention in the short story about how disgusted Briggs is with her body. The fact that she's old, basically, and of course old and kind of decaying and not in her prime. So this is a society where everybody is in their prime. And if you're not in your prime, then you're somebody who's not taking the miracle drug. And then if you're not taking a miracle drug, you're automatically a suspect of being a breeder or associating with breeders, I guess.
Interestingly, the state or the condition of the house or the apartment that this pop squad of Briggs raids also kind of reflects this state, this squalid and disgusting state. And this is described in great detail in the story.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of dichotomy going on between clean versus dirty. There's a mention of the food that they have in the fridge. So there's a difference between this kind of processed and healthy food that the people in these conditions eat compared to the natural healthy food that the people who take reju, which is the miracle drug, and who live in these kind of towers above the clouds, the food that they eat, which is natural and healthy. Living above versus living below, kind of the cliche of, you're living in heaven or you're living in the sort of the underworld. Young versus old, which I already mentioned. And of course, aseptic environments versus kind of, shitty and unwashed environments. Mm-hmm. And then finally, I think the one that's kind of more crucial to this is the difference between living in a very controlled environment versus one that's completely out of control. So the controlled one, people don't have children. They stay the same age forever. They get, they live, in theory, they could live hundreds of years if they don't have an accident or some kind of disease. That's not age dependent. And so their lives are kind of consistently the same. There's no element of chaos in their lives. Whereas the other people, in this case, the people being raided, which includes the breeders as well, they live in a sort of out of control environment where children, I would say, are a manifestation of this chaos and out of control, because children, in the logic of the story, are not kind of rational beings, and they just kind of do random things, and they, will, as mentioned in the story itself, they will vomit on your shirt and get your clothes dirty, whereas the people up above are never dirty. Their clothes are always impeccable, and they're always impeccable themselves.
Yeah, so we have this interesting dichotomy between civilization, like high-tech advanced civilization, and basically wilderness. And this also, not only on a societal level, but also on a purely biological level, it shows in the story. Yeah,
so in my opinion, and Lenny, I'm not sure what you think, in my opinion, the story is more about all of that, whereas the killing of children is just a kind of a shocking manifestation of this kind of control, predictable, clean, kind of young versus kind of the old, out of control, unwashed, chaotic, etc.
Yeah, I think it is definitely one aspect that needs to be considered, especially with regards to the aspect of sacrifice, which I'm sure we're going to talk about later on.
Yeah.
So interesting. You mentioned the shock value. in the TV adaptation, this scene that I just read out to you is actually skipped. So it cuts directly from the gunshot to the next scene. It's only implied.
Yeah, they don't actually show the heads kicking back in successive jerks, blah blah blah, right?
Yeah.
They just show the kind of the consequences of the action. So we cut to scene 2, or rather, we go to scene 2 in the story. So Briggs is coming back to his home, in which he's in his flying car, which I guess is a curious choice for people who live forever, because I can imagine a lot of accidents happening in a flying car, considering how people drive in land cars these days. And so he ends up in the kind of this kind of high towers of the city, which is above the clouds. It's a very sci-fi sort of environment. And his girlfriend, because people don't marry in the future since they live forever.
They do.
Yeah, they do mention marriage. Yes, you're right. It's just not like a common choice, because till death do us part actually means till eternity do us part. Because nobody dies. So he enters a sort of upper class, high society situation where his girlfriend is giving a performance. In the book, she plays the viola. In the TV series, she's a singer, and apparently this is a performance she's been training for practicing for 15 years or something like that, and they will perform this once, right? Because they live forever, so there's no time cost associated with things. They can do things for practice something for 15 years for one exclusive performance. Briggs is almost late to the performance, which pisses him off, and as he's watching his girlfriend perform, he notices that he's got blood stains on his hands from the killing earlier. Even though he's changed his clothes, the blood didn't come off his hands. So this is just kind of a visual reminder of the fact that he's still thinking about that squat that he visited and the killings that he committed earlier.
So now we see this other side, this shiny and light side of this futuristic society. Is it dystopian? Is it utopian? I think if it is a dystopia for some, then it should be called a dystopia. But nevertheless, there's also this shiny side that it has.
Yeah, I mean that's. I mean, what was your first reaction seeing, both of these, like the first one and the second one, Lenny?
Yeah, and also with Briggs at this very high class upper society and occasion, he seems a bit out of place. But I mean, when we think about like people committing terrible crimes, maybe even in the name of the state or authority, and then simply attending these kinds of events. I mean, there are several examples of this in human history as well, but it definitely suggests that something's is wrong with this kind of society.
Yeah, Briggs is an interesting character, obviously, and that's why Paolo Bacigalupi picked him up for the story, because he's somebody who straddles both worlds. So he goes down for his job, and then he comes up where his life is, where he sleeps at night, his girlfriend, his kind of social life. But then he's somebody who can get on his flying car, and then kind of come down to where people live, the other people live, and do the dirty work. So it's kind of a bit of poetic license, because perhaps somebody who lived up in the clouds would not do the sort of dirty work that Briggs does. But it's I think it's a useful character because it allows us to see both sides of the society, I guess. And of course it generates a massive amount of dissociation in him, because he has to live two lives in effect, right? He has to be effective in the dirty side of it, the kind of below side of it, and then on the high side he has to mingle with his friends and kind of social life.
And also, one more interesting aspect is that, I mean, Briggs is confronted with the life down below on an almost daily basis, and throughout the story he's trying to understand why people would choose such a life as opposed to the wonderful, splendid, shiny, immortal life that his peers have. And the members of the upper class, higher society, they have no understanding at all of why people would choose anything else. And this is also described in the story.
Yeah, it's interesting because we don't really learn about the people who live below if they would choose to live in the clouds if they could. But obviously, we do know that the breeders would not choose to live in the clouds because then they would definitely not be able to have children because they would not be able to hide in the society above. Okay, so we go to the next scene, which I guess we could say is the third scene. So that's after the performance. There's quite a lot of context in this case. So the story, like most stories, short stories, they need kind of cut straight to the action and then explain what's going on later. So this is sort of where things are starting to be explained. So there's been massive climate catastrophe. Even New York has gone under, which we can assume has been destroyed by rising sea levels or something to that effect. The most of the land mass was then covered in a jungle, in an artificially created jungle for carbon capture, which is what we assume. In fact, there's like monkeys in this jungle, and when the flying car is going up and down, the Briggs has to contend with these actual monkeys. And in this third scene, we get a lot of that background. We hear about Reju, the miracle drug that makes people live forever. So we've got quite a bit of age disparity between Briggs and Alice, who is his girlfriend. And this age disparity, of course, it only really applies to the age in which they stopped aging, I guess, because afterwards, what's the difference between somebody being 150 and somebody being 130 or whatever numbers you can come up with, right? At that point, everybody's over 100. It just kind of flows into the same thing. But her body is considerably younger, or stopped aging younger than his body did. So there's a bit of an age difference there. And it tells in the level of maturity as well, where he's more reflexive person and she's more impulsive. I mean, as much as somebody who can practice 15 years for a single performance can be impulsive. So there's
and also a bit more naive.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell she never visited the populations below, I would say. Because she along with other people who are at this party, they mostly have a view of the people below as kind of a mass of people who all think the same and who all do the same thing. So something that's interesting here is that Alice talks about another viola player who was a master, but that person who chose to stop taking Reju and then just aged to the point where she couldn't perform anymore. And I can't remember exactly if that person had died or not, but Alice was quite shocked that somebody would choose to age. And she has basically no empathy. So she cannot imagine arguments from somebody else's sake for their choices.
Yeah, actually, this former colleague of hers, I think she's still alive, but long past her prime. And for Alice, she is as good as dead already. She will be dead in 20 years. So kind of discarded already.
Yeah, and it's interesting because here we also hear about people who choose to stop taking the miracle drug, but who at the same time are not doing it because they want to become breeders. They have other thoughts. But since Alice cannot understand why somebody would do it, and Briggs doesn't give us any clues either, we can only imagine why they do it, I guess.
And this is also worth noting because Alice is completely dependent on this Reju drug in order to give her world-class performances. She wouldn't be able to do this otherwise. So she says it's definitely not worth it and cannot understand why someone would choose to cut Reju treatment.
Yeah. There's quite an interesting quote, a bit they speak during the episode, which is, "We can't keep letting people into this party if no one ever leaves," which is, I guess, the populist, the kind of phrase that would appear in a political party's poster to get everybody to take Reju, right?
And interestingly enough, this was added for the TV adaptation. I don't think it can be found in the original short story.
No, I don't think it's there now.
But at least it hints to this connection between immortality and becoming sterile and not reproducing, which is never really explained in detail. But we have this statement: we can't keep letting people into this party if no one ever leaves. And I think this hints at some sort of lifeboat ethics. And for those of you who are not familiar with this concept, there was this almost infamous Finnish radical ecologist and environmentalist called Pentti Linkola. And he made a number of very controversial and radical statements, including this one. what to do when a ship carrying 100 passengers suddenly capsizes and only one lifeboat. When the lifeboat is full, those who hate life will try to load it with more people and sink the lot. Those who love and respect life will take the ship's axe and sever the extra hands that cling to the sides of the boat. And in this scenario, these extra people would be the children.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what would you do, Lenny?
I mean,
if this drug appeared?
This is actually a difficult question. Now we're confronted with this very cruel situation of one adult man killing children. I mean, this is a very shocking thought, even to think about it. But I think we're facing a situation with a scarcity of resources. There are not infinite resources on this planet. So I think this is also a recurring theme in the work of Paolo Bacigalupi, the scarcity of resources. And I mean, trying to allocate these resources is a difficult task. So I think it would make sense to reduce the number of consumers who have need for these resources. And I mean, not bringing any more consumers into existence is one thing, but what do you do with the additional consumers? I think this is a difficult question, and I hope we will never see a scenario like the one portrayed and depicted in the story. Yeah,
because on one hand, if somebody said, "Well, we've made a drug that stops aging," on the face value would be that this is a wonderful thing, right? Why would somebody be against it? People intrinsically don't want to die, and you're guaranteed death because of aging, even though you would still have all the other ways of dying, of course, besides aging. But if you could reduce that one, that'd be incredible. So it starts with that, but then you have to think, well, we're already very stretched. Of course, you could reduce the amount of resources that each person needs to survive, and not just survive, but thrive, have a life worth living. But then what happens, right?
Mm.
And would introducing a drug that's, let's say, for example, that we have, basically kind of birth rates are influenced by women mostly, right? Because they are the ones who kind of hold exclusively even if men take their rights away, but in biological terms, it's women, the females in a population of, in this case, mammals or humans, that determine kind of the birth rates and how many babies can be born, kind of the top level, right? So each woman has a period in which they're fertile in their entire lives, a series of several decades, but that's kind of a top level limitation for how many babies a woman can have. And certainly there have been women in history who've pretty much been consistently pregnant their entire lives, as they only stopped being pregnant when it was not possible for them to be pregnant anymore. And I'm sure this wasn't of their own choosing. That's not the point I'm trying to make. So what you have is, if all of a sudden, people are taking a drug that makes them live forever, then this period of being pregnant, of being fertile, is extended forever as well. So to avoid this problem in the world of the story, what they started doing as soon as they introduced this drug was put birth control in it. So you cannot take the Reju drug without taking birth control as well. So that's how they fixed one side of the problem, which is that, of course, women would live forever. So in theory, you could have hundreds of babies, each one of them. And the other way they control that is by forbidding births, because people can choose to stop taking Reju and to kind of just die of natural causes. But then they needed somewhere else to control, and that's where kind of the baby killing comes from.
Mm-hmm. And what did not really make sense to me when I watched the episode is, now, if you are born outside of society, like your mother decided to cut Reju treatment and gave birth to you in secret in some squalid, rundown place, hiding from the authorities, obviously this child would not be registered immediately anywhere. So it wouldn't have access to these scarce resources anyway. So I wonder why these illicit children are seen as such a threat to the upper class in the high society if they don't have access to these precious resources and commodities anyway.
Yeah, it's an odd one, and of course, something Lenny, you and I have been discussed before is what happens because the people in this world are going to be lower and lower as people will die of things that aren't related to age, right? If a flying car will crash and that's kind of 4 people dead, or maybe there's an issue with one of these high-rise towers and people die, and there's of course even Briggs mentions it that there's quite a bit of violence down in the jungle, in this case literally a jungle, where people kind of shoot each other, and there's drug addiction problems as well, so there's kind of a criminality and violence associated with that. So surely there's people dying, and if there's people dying, and everybody is on birth control, literally everybody's on birth control, and babies are killed, eventually they would need a way to address that, and some kind of controlled births, say allow, well, we're going to pass licenses to have children, for example. But that's not addressed in the story at all. I think ultimately the society would kind of collapse as they would have to give out these licenses for births, and then people would complain, and there'd be protests, and people would feel unfair that they never get a license and others get a license, and the whole thing would just come crashing down. But in the realm of the story, they're stable in the sense.
Yeah. It's more like a thought experiment. Imagine an immortal population that is very, very stable.
Yeah. So
it does not allow for like additions or subtractions.
Yes. So they, as part of kind of this whole context of life in the clouds, Alice goes for her shot of Riju, which apparently needs to be taken every once in a while. So this is a very orgasmic experience because she gets extremely horny afterwards and wants to have sex with Briggs. And also all the descriptions is that it feels amazing to have Riju put into your body. Where in the TV show it kind of looks like almost like a blood transfer sort of thing. I was reminded of the EPO treatments they do for cyclists. I mean, not that they're legal, but just kind of having kind of blood with more white blood cells. I believe that's what it consists of, being put into the body, and kind of feelings of euphoria and kind of energy that come from that. So not only is Riju good for you because you don't age and you feel fantastic forever, and God knows, as a 45-year-old, I wish I had started taking Riju when I was 20 years old, because it is rough. Not only do you feel great and it's good for you, it actually feels good. So there's an extra element there. So that just adds to the fact of why would people stop taking this just to have children?
I mean, at the end of the day, it's a drug addiction.
Yeah, right? It is a drug addiction. Yeah.
Now, one interesting aspect that was actually changed in the TV adaptation is a dialogue between Alice and Briggs, where Alice says in the story, "If we weren't going to live forever, I'd marry you." And Briggs says, "If we weren't going to live forever, I would get you pregnant." Now, this creates a bit of an awkward situation. I mean, it's implied that they're joking, but this is reversed in the series, and I wonder why they did this.
Yeah. I'm not sure either. I was quite shocked because I saw the TV show first and then the short story. It's such an important line, and to flip it around, it reverses the characters, doesn't it?
Yes.
Because I like the book version better, because Briggs is the one that has contact with the world of breeders and can feel tempted by that world, whereas Alice seems happy to ignore the whole thing. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think maybe they didn't want to portray him as some sort of creep, also taking the age gap into account. Maybe this is one of the reasons they changed it. I don't know.
Yes, it's hard to tell, isn't it, without asking the screenwriter who adapted it, or the director. So anyway, there's a recurring element of the dinosaur. So Alice also receives a dinosaur toy, very similar or exactly pretty much the same toy, or the same model of toy that the child at the beginning of the story was holding as Briggs killed her. Well, do you see that? I've already using it for children in the same way that they do in the story, as they killed the child.
It serves to dehumanize these alien little creatures.
Yes, and you know why they did it, right? Because in this case they're kind of a nuisance, right? They're like a pest, right? So you have to eliminate the pest. So there's quite a bit more context that applies later. Well, we told that the Riju clinic, there's a bit of context that she's kind of going private for her treatments, but that there's always Riju down in the jungles that's supplied for free. But she uses the private version because it's easier to get appointments. It's more overall better experience.
And we also see this high-tech, shiny doctor's office.
Yeah. And one can only imagine what the Reju clinics look like down below, which, as far as we've seen, is this kind of very dirty environment. And actually thinking about some of the descriptions, there's another element in the dichotomy, which is things are very dry up in the clouds, whereas things are very wet down below, isn't it? There's like always an element of very kind of these kind of very clean, reflexive surfaces up above, and then everything just being kind of always having some mold or some kind of
humid.
Humid conditions, which makes sense for the carbon capture thing, right? Than being an actual jungle or set among a jungle. Now, there's a line that Lenny picked up here where Alice says, "It's so wonderful to be alive." And this is a crucial thing. I mean, for the listeners of this podcast, which we know who they are, vegans and antinatalists and vegan antinatalists, because this story is, in some ways, is the kind of the story that people who fight against antinatalism, against the concept of antinatalism, will like to paint us as, like, oh, you're baby killers, even though I don't think any antinatalist has ever said
or maybe
anything to that effect.
This is the future that antinatalists want.
Yes, absolutely. But it's a curious one, isn't it? Because Reju would be, even though I don't imagine antinatalists telling anybody if they should take Reju or not, but for an antinatalist, Reju is not a wonder drug, because if anything, it's a life extender. If we consider life as a negative, overall negative experience, then a life that lasts 200 years is as bad as 4 lives that last 50 years, if we want to use simple arguments like that.
Yeah, and I mean, this phrase or this sentence, it's so wonderful to be alive. It's not a very antinatalist thing to say. So maybe we can say this is a futuristic, child-free society, but it is definitely not antinatalist by any stretch of imagination, because they hardly ever talk about the interests of the one being brought into existence by these so-called breeders. They only talk about the privileges and the commodities you would lose if you decided to have children.
Yeah, it's all seen from this kind of selfish perspective of the people who are already there in the world, who exist, and they don't want to share, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the only way to explain
ethics again.
Yeah, they don't want to share it, so they don't want more people to come in and have to share with them. Whereas the antinatalist arguments are, I mean, we're not going to go into them in this episode, at least, but they in no way related to that. What this reminds me of are the arguments, because in our communities, in the antinatalist communities, we often come across people who think we come from a sort of a ethical, child-free world. So they come in and they say, oh, you guys are great because you guys and girls are great because babies are so annoying, and I hate being in a bus, or I hate being on a plane and the children start screaming when the pressure changes.
And I wish this child didn't exist.
Yeah. And that has nothing to do with antinatalism. And in that sense, this world has nothing to do with antinatalism, but it's still useful to talk about it because there's quite a few things here to pick up and which are related to antinatalism.
And especially to the meaning of life, which is also a central topic. Now, one more thing to add is that adoption is not considered at all. I mean, many things you could possibly do with these surplus people, and they just kill them. But at least in theory, adoption might be worth considering. But this is not, like, the parental role is something that has died out in this society.
Yes, and I think that's also what makes the breeders go to such a danger to become parents. I mean, there might be an element of kind of forbidden fruit there, where some people might be discouraged from becoming parents because of other people's parenting experience, since barely anybody here knows anybody who's a parent, and if they know, they're in danger themselves because they're aware of a crime and are not reporting it. They might even fantasize more about what it is to become a parent. But that's just a theory.
Yeah, so this is one aspect, like the risks you're willing to take in order to become a parent. But I mean, child's point of view is almost not taken into consideration here.
Yeah. About the kind of the difference between kind of private Reju treatments and public Reju treatments. I guess in my world, it would be the difference between private healthcare and the NHS. There's a part in the book where they talk about it, and they say you pay a little more than you do for the Medicaid generics, but you don't rub shoulders with a bunch of starving gamblers and knitheads and drunks who all still want their Reju, even if they're wasting every day of their endless lives. And there's a funny one because they solved aging, but they couldn't solve boredom or some people being resentful of what other people do with their lives. It's pretty much the same old story about it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. I guess in this case, it's easier to imagine the end of aging than it is the end of death in a way than it is to imagine the end of inequality. And in this case, boredom, because Alice is kind of criticizing, Alison Briggs and their society is criticizing that these other people who live eternal lives, instead of practicing for 15 years for a performance, they'd rather gamble or do drugs or drink alcohol, as if all of these activities didn't kind of just share the same fundamental origin, which is life is very long and their lives are much longer than ours. And people will get bored and they will do things, to avoid this boredom.
Yeah, nevertheless, I think it is interesting that we learn that literally everyone can receive this Reju treatment, even the scum of society, even the people they are hunting right now.
Yeah. I think it's also related to the idea of control, isn't it?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, because if you get people hooked on Reju, I mean, hooked as in it's a really good experience, plus you stop aging. But then you can't have babies. If you can kind of keep them hooked on it, you can control the population rate. And we can remember, for example, the many policies that China has enacted to control their population growth with a one child policy. And those were quite extreme. I mean, they were not shooting babies like Briggs is shooting babies, but it was quite extreme. And the measures they took for it. I'm sure if they had a drug that they could give to people, which was birth control disguised as something else, they would have done it, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to imply that China would do it, by the way. I'm just saying for the measures they took, this is just kind of a measure of that kind of population control that could definitely happen. So in this case, like a part of society controlling another part of society, but funnily enough, also controlling itself as they do it. Yeah, so there's no adoption. As we mentioned, obviously people are going to die, so there's no way to kind of bring people back, kind of boost the numbers when there's a disaster, I mean, they're still living in a world that's ravaged by climate change. So potentially there could be major catastrophes, and they have no easy way to bring population numbers up, because the people from, say, Briggs and Alice's society, I have a hard time believing that they would willingly stop taking Reju just to do their patriotic duty of breeding. So anyway, there's no adoption recourse for these children. So well, that was the party. That was the Reju clinic. It's back at work for Briggs. He goes into another crime scene. There's quite a bit of commotion. He's not supposed to shoot the child in front of the mother, because the mother, otherwise, the mothers are not killed. They're taken to these kind of work camps and kind of taken prisoner and serve these sentences. I don't know if they're forever, but I assume they're forever. It's kind of a life sentence. And they're not supposed to shoot the child. I guess they come up with some sort of fairy tale to tell the mothers, yes, we've taken care of the child. Maybe not to rattle the mother and not to make her combative. But Briggs can't help himself, and he executes a child before the crime scene photos can be taken and before all that can be collected. In the TV show, there's this kind of a standoff where a man attempts to shoot Briggs, and Briggs is surprisingly passive about it, as in he doesn't really try to avoid being shot, which might hint, and we'll learn later that it's true, that he's probably fed up with life at this point.
Yeah, just one more thing to add. I think that these mothers are very well aware of what would happen to their illicit children.
Yeah, but there's that bit where they go, don't kill them in front of their mother, right? So maybe there's a reason for that. Or maybe there isn't a reason for that. I mean, this story is like a fantasy. I mean, it's a sci-fi fantasy story. It's not supposed to be super realistic. It's supposed to be about, this hypothetical scenario and kind of creating food for thought around that.
Nevertheless, this specific scene was also changed for the TV adaptation. In the TV adaptation, it's a man who attempts to shoot Briggs, but is then shut down by Briggs' colleagues.
Yeah. But Briggs is surprisingly easy about it. Yeah, he doesn't seem to fear death. That's what I'm.
Yeah, he's very numb and desensitized.
Yes.
People described him also in this scene. Describe him as having dead eyes.
Yeah, which will come later. So we've kind of passed the middle of the story by now. Lenny, I believe there's a bit of the book you wanted to highlight at this point.
Yeah, I mean, because this is an internal monologue again, and here Briggs questions evolution and questions the role of DNA. So I will read this out to you. Who the hell chooses to live in dark apartments with shitty diapers, instant food, and no sleep for years on end? The whole breeding thing is an anachronism. 21st century ritual torture we don't need anymore. But these girls keep trying to turn back the clock and pop out the pups, little lizard brains compelled to pass on some DNA. And there's a new batch every year, little bursts of offspring cropping up here and there, the convulsions of a species trying to restart itself and get evolution rolling again, like we can't tell that we've already won. Now, this reminds me a bit of this transhumanist view of humans and human reproduction. I remember David Pearce often describes us in our current state as basically Darwinian malware, and hopes that we will achieve a state in which we have basically conquered and overcome these mechanisms of evolution. And it seems that at that point in the story, they have actually become, in a way, transhuman.
It's funny because you highlighted that sentence in your notes, and I was, of course, doing my own notes separately, and I highlighted that one as well. Mm-hmm. And the bit that kind of highlighted for me is that, this kind of breaking this DNA and this kind of compulsion thing and being kind of being addicted to the breeding and anachronism. I mean, look, as societies around the world develop, and when I say develop, I mean one of the key indicators would be female empowerment and rights and universal personal freedoms, which are all things I would associate it with progress. Those societies will, in general, have lower birth rates than the others. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a direct correlation between GDP and birth rate, for example. And when the author speaks about anachronism, the breeding thing being an anachronism, 21st century ritual, we don't need anymore. It's hard not to think that there's, even though this is the point of view of somebody who's a killer in a very messed up society, he's also right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's right. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, Briggs has to do his job, and his job is to find more breeders and put them in jail, and then I'll put them in work camps, and then, of course, take out children, pop children. Mm-hmm. Of course, pop here for killing, not for giving birth to. So he goes to find.
This is a pun that is also made in the short story.
Yeah, they mentioned about popping. Yeah, popping children. Yeah.
No, first time I just read the title Pop Squad, and I thought maybe it is about some futuristic like pop music group, some boy band or whatever. Until I found out it is actually about like population control and popping kids.
Yeah, those three letters do a lot of work in the English language.
Yeah.
So he goes to a shop called Ipswich Collectibles, where they have toys. Of course, toys are not functional in this society. They're antiques and collector's items because there's no children to play with them. So they kind of have a completely different function. Can I just say, as a person who loves dogs, has dogs, would like to have even more dogs, there are no dogs in this story, by the way. Mm-hmm. And this, I imagine this society would be a society with a lot of dogs because people would have a lot of free time, a lot of the impulse to care for things which are smaller and more vulnerable than them. But there's no dogs, there's no cats, there are no pets, at least not in the Briggs society. In the jungle, there are monkeys, but they're nobody's pets, but we see no dogs. It's really odd. So toys are, in this case, these toys are for children, but there's no children, so the toys just exist as kind of a curiosity. So he goes to find out where this Alice's dinosaur came from, figuring out that if he can find out where Alice's dinosaur comes from, he'll find out where the dinosaur for the child at the beginning of the story came from, and hopefully kind of find a lead on other children, or on dens of other children, or ghettos of breeders. There's a bit that's quite funny, and I'll highlight this because I found it quite funny. Maybe some of my listeners will find it funny. A bell rings. The shop's main doors to the concourse slide open. A woman steps through, hesitant. Her hair is pulled back in a ponytail, and she hasn't applied any makeup. And I can tell, even before she's all the way through the door, that she's one of them, a mom. And I actually laughed at this bit. I don't know if it was supposed to be serious or not, because the whole thing is written in the first person, hard-boiled crime detective story. But I just found this hilarious. The fact that he looks at a woman and she doesn't care about her appearance. She's a mom.
I mean, it's quite an interesting twist on like the prestige, or on the on how society views parents in this society, as opposed to this dystopian society, where I think it's mostly child-free people that are accused of being like selfish and whatever. So this is very interesting.
Yeah,
like this contempt for parents. And I don't think I've seen this, like, I don't know if you can call it a slur, but this word breeder in any other fictional story so far. So this was interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, breeder is somebody is used in English language, for example, somebody who makes dogs, right? So somebody who deals in dogs and who has like a female and gets the female pregnant and then kind of sells the dogs or cats or other pets, or even other animals, like farm animals. But as a slur, it's been used, for example, by the gay community to mean straight people. So there's kind of a context there, but this context doesn't apply to the story. The story actually means everybody who breeds, because they're criminals according to the laws of this land. So in this the toy store, the woman who runs the store is quite old. In the book, she's really, really old. In the TV show, she's not that old. She's probably slightly older than Briggs, maybe 15 years old or something like that, maybe in the 50s or 60s. But so there's this woman who looks like a mom. So obviously Briggs is immediately onto her, and after she kind of leaves, he goes after her. Basically, he finds out where she lives and kind of goes after her.
Yeah, but he does this off duty. He does this because he is genuinely interested in her reasons, like for abandoning the glorious Regio lifestyle and choosing this parental role. And he's now kind of in an interesting situation, because it is his job to hunt down these people, and now he does this purely out of curiosity, basically. So not with the intent to harm. And it's also shown that he is actually in a strange way attracted to her.
Yes, and he does go to visit her, but because he's off duty, he's not coming in like with a full raid squad, where there's like guns and men in gas masks grabbing women and children and people screaming. He just goes by himself.
Yeah, and not collecting evidence, not taking any photos, not registering any illicit people.
Yeah, we can tell by his previous activity that he never gets a chance to talk to the mothers, because ultimately they just do raids, right? So he goes to her house and he puts his after the initial kind of tension, because she knows who he is, right? The woman is alone in the house with the child. She knows who he is immediately, or what his job is. So he kind of diffuses the situation. He kind of takes off his hat and gun, and he puts the gun on the table as a sort of a way to kind of explain that he only wants to have a conversation, that he's not there to do his job of killing.
Nevertheless, the woman is constantly eyeing his gun, so this creates a lot of tension in their conversation.
Yes. Now, there's a variation here between the story and the written short story and the TV show, in that on the short story, he definitely is very sexually aroused by her postnatal body. In the TV show, they did make her very hot. I mean, as much as a cartoon or an animation could be hot. So they gave her like an attractive body and face, etc., especially because she's breastfeeding in both versions. But it's kind of underplayed compared to the written version. In the written version, undoubtedly, he wants to get off Riju and come live in this shack with his woman. Yeah. And
Well, at least we
at least have sex with her. Yeah.
witness like his lizard brain slowly taking over, which is what he had just criticized a few pages earlier. So we see he is not immune to these like evolutionary mechanisms either.
Yeah, which is why he's, as I said, he's kind of straddling both worlds, like one foot in each of the worlds.
But also like this aspect of sexuality works completely differently up in the clouds with Alice and this sterile, shiny environment, and now he's like being confronted with these primal, very primitive impressions, and he's actually surprised that he's so aroused by them.
Yeah. So we get a bit of more context about the world in this scene, where we hear about where the sperm comes from, because in this story, both versions, the parents are not really featured. Although you can imagine that the man who almost shoots Briggs could perhaps be a parent, but it's really hard to tell. So there's like a black market for sperm. Men will come off Riju to become sperm donors and then go back on Riju or not. And then women kind of take the sperm and kind of get, kind of inseminate themselves to have children, but it's all kind of black market. So we never hear the perspective of a male parent, I guess.
Yeah, in a way, it's a bit like almost misogynistic. Like they're focusing exclusively on mothers and on the aging of women in this society.
Yeah. So we get Briggs gets what he wants, because he gets quite a long discussion on explanation why this woman became a breeder. So she's been alive for 118 years, at least in the short story. And she says, "I'm thinking that it's not just about me." I'm quoting for the book, by the way. "I'm thinking I want a baby, and I want to see what she sees today when she wakes up, and what she'll find and see that I've never seen before, because that's new. Finally, something new. I love seeing things through her little eyes and not through dead eyes like yours." And she also does another explanation of why she had a child. And this is more interesting for us as antinatalists. Mm-hmm. "I just wanted one ever since I was a little girl." And then Briggs asks, "Play with dolls, all that, collectibles?" And then she says, I guess I did. I had a little plastic doll, and I used to dress it up, and I'd play tea with it. We'd make tea, and then I'd pour some on her face to make her drink. It wasn't a great doll, voice input, not much repertoire. My parents weren't rich. Let's go shopping. Okay, for what? For watches. I love watches. Simple like that, but I liked it. And then one day I called her my baby. I don't know why I did, though. And the doll said, "I love you, mommy." In my view, this is not making a good case for having babies, because if the people in the clouds are completely selfish about hoarding their resources and not sharing the party with anybody else, then this woman, every single reason she gives for having a child, it all begins with I wanted this.
Yeah. Nevertheless, I think this raises an important question, namely, how or to what extent can a society, even a like highly developed society, effectively repress these urges? Is there a way, or isn't there a way? I think this is also one of the points that this story is trying to make, that no matter how technologically advanced you are, there are some limits, and there are people who want to be parents no matter what.
Yeah.
I mean, ethically, this is of course, I think not a decision one could defend, especially in light of what would happen to the child. I think this is very, very irresponsible. But nevertheless, it seems to be a fact, at least in this story, that people are going to have children or breed anyway.
Yeah, even in the most advanced societies we have in our current world, 2023, let's say, for example, Japan, where the birth rates are extremely, extremely low, probably some of the lowest, maybe even the lowest birth rates in recorded history, people will still have children, right? The birth rates are not zero. There was like some kind of positive number. So what they're trying to do in the world of the story is reduce them to zero. And in order to reduce them to zero, they basically have to resort to violence and to creating a horrible society.
And even that does not
Yes, even then it's not zero.
as efficiently as they wish.
Even creating a drug that everybody has to take, and it's an incredible product but it comes under control, even with the threat of your child being brutally murdered, and you going to a work camp for the rest of your life. Even that is not enough to bring birth rates to zero. Yeah, so we're approaching the end of the story now. There's two different endings, an ending for the short story and the TV series. They kind of are different. I think they're trying to do similar things, but in a different way. The TV show is more dramatic. The short story is more kind of subdued. So in the short story, in both versions, Briggs doesn't kill anybody. So he just hears what the woman has to say. And it's hard to tell if he agrees or not, but he got what he wanted, which is to hear the arguments from a breeder at last.
And in addition to that, he also starts to feel sympathy for the child, which he then addresses by it's, in this case, her proper pronouns. And he is actually visibly touched by this little girl's curiosity. And we see this girl putting his hat on his head. And so this is definitely an emotion that is that has been alien for him. So there's a new perspective also that he gets from this conversation and from this encounter. Very central part of the story.
Yeah. So the short story ending, I think you wanted to mention that, Lenny.
Yeah, definitely. So I will now read out the final paragraph of this short story, which happens after a little fight over the gun. But as Carlos said, nobody is shot. Then he simply leaves the house, and it says, maybe they will make it. Anything is possible. Maybe the kid will make it to 18, get some black market redo, and live to be 150. More likely, in 6 months, or a year, or 2 years, or 10, a cop will bust down the door and pop the kid. But it won't be me. I run for my cruiser, splashing through mud and vines and wet. And for the first time in a long time, the rain feels new. It also refers to the conversation he had earlier with the mother who wanted to experience something new, and now at the end of the story, he gets to experience his life anew, with this new perspective.
Yeah, who knows what happens to Briggs, but I prefer this ending to the ending in the TV show, in which he leaves the house. Pentel is there, so his partner is there, and Briggs is afraid that Pentel will go into the house and kill the child. We can assume that, so he shoots Pentel, and Pentel shoots back, and I guess they both die. And Briggs dies with the rain on his face. We can imagine the rain feels new for this Briggs who's dying, because we're offering kind of this redemptive moment where he's kind of being hit by the rain, but I guess he's happy with the choice he's made.
Yeah,
but it's hard to tell.
Get to see a shot of his eyes, which show some life. It's not the dead eyes that he had before.
Yeah. So I guess in a sense he did something good for somebody else and felt born again because of it. And that was the argument that the breeder, to use the terms for the story, had used before. I would say Briggs has done something nice for somebody else, but I don't think the mothers in the story are doing anything nice for anybody.
Yeah, also I find this whole redemption arc a bit it's just a case of this Hollywood simplicity again.
Yeah, it's a bit easy, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
I mean, because Briggs, we don't know how long he's been working this beat. Yeah, but in theory, he could have been a baby killer for the last 60 years of his life, right?
Yeah.
So that's, that will be literally thousands of people he's killed. Yeah.
Yeah. For decades, maybe even for a century, he has been hunting down parents and children and committing atrocious acts. And now he spares one child, and now he's found his redemption. Great.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's great. It's even better than being a Catholic. Yeah. So anyway, that was Pop Squad. I've enjoyed watching and reading the story. Thanks for the recommendation. Whoever dude one might be, God bless you on your journey through the internet. But thanks very much. I enjoyed it. It made me think about all this stuff I discussed over the past hour. God knows if we took this long to speak about a 15-minute episode, how long it's going to take us for a movie that's like 3 hours. that's going to be like an epic, right? That's going to be like a whole year of shows just to talk about an actual movie or a book. But I guess for our listeners who've spent the last hour with us, I think even with all the spoilers we've given, I think it's still worth reading the story or watching the episode, because you'll get a different reaction rather than hearing our description of these events.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also enjoyed reading and watching the story or the episode. And I think it does, even though I don't fully agree with the message maybe that is that the author tries to convey, nevertheless, I think it offers some interesting twists, like first of all, on the idea of genetic immortality. Because usually, like when you ask people, why do you have kids? One reason is, well, they want to live on in their genetic legacy, like achieve some sort of immortality. And it's quite interesting that in this story, this is completely reversed. Like the only way to become actually immortal is to give up on reproduction and procreation. So this is one interesting twist. And then, of course, another interesting twist on the stigmatization of child-free people in certain societies. Now, this is reversed too, as we mentioned earlier. Like this is an extreme version of this whole concept that life is better without kids.
Yeah. It's funny though, because I don't think the creators of the story intended the story to be propaganda for a childless or child-free society. But I can imagine a lot of people coming into contact with the story and going, "Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, let's have that." But I can imagine people thinking like that. I mean, as I said, I'm ambivalent. I would love to have Riju, while also having the option to end my life if I choose, if it became internally bored with it. But I would love to stop aging. Every time I wake up, I wish I could stop aging, as my body creaks out of bed. And I mentioned in episode 1 that I work out a lot, and my recovery times as a 45-year-old, give me all the Riju, please. And I would love that, but on the other hand, I don't want to sponsor a society that kills children
or be complicit in the system.
But benefit from that system, and also not just the killing of children, but the removal of reproductive choices, which is what this society does. So it does kind of the opposite of an abortion ban, right?
Yeah. But one more interesting aspect that we like briefly mentioned earlier is the meaning of life that is found in having children. And I think this is in this story, this is portrayed as something very effectively providing some sense of meaning for people, for the mothers who like go in, like accept all these repressions just to have children, and even for Briggs in the end, who decides to spare these and in the TV adaptation even face death just to spare this new life that somehow has given his own life new meaning. And I mean, when you ask parents, why do you have children? What made you have children? Then often, I think this is one of the most common replies, that it gives me a lot of meaning and purpose.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Yeah. And when we now look at this futuristic, child-free society, how do people try to fill this void that these breeders try to fill by having children? I mean, they're practicing for decades to give an artistic performance. We also learn of a man who spent centuries creating some sculptures on his balcony, but nevertheless, it's an endless void that they are trying to fill. They're just trying to pass the time, this infinite time that they have.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Ultimately, they're all humans, and they're coming from the same hole, from the same lack in their lives and the experience of life.
Yeah. Nevertheless, I think there's a crucial difference when it comes to like this sort of self-sacrifice, which is, of course, much more visible, much more prominent in the parents than in the child-free, immortal people. I mean, they literally give up their immortality just to have children. I think that's a degree of sacrifice that most child-free people, I don't think they could show, they could prove.
So anyway, that was Pop Squad. Watch it, read it. I think both are worthy. I think if I had to choose, I would just watch the TV episode. I didn't like the kind of the noir style of the short story that much. And as usual, as we mentioned in the beginning, keep sending us your suggestions. We do have quite a long list of things we want to get through, and we're doing at this rate of one episode a month. It will take us ages to get through all those, but of course we welcome all suggestions.
Yeah, we will just take our redo so we can cover
yes,
all this.
Yes. This podcast will be still going in 2123. 2123. The world would have ended, but we'll still keep taking our redo and doing the podcast. I mean, God knows I'm already sterile anyway. So anyway, that's all from us, and see you on the next episode. Follow our link tree and subscribe to whatever platform you're hearing this on.
Take care.